Joining me is a woman who was directing all of the things, and she has a new book out. She's actually doing a revival of the Wiz. I got to talk to her about that as well. Let me welcome to the show the one and only Schele Williams. Welcome.
Hi, Karen. It's wonderful to be here.
Good to have you. Good to have you. First of all, before we get into this beautiful, amazing book, Your Legacy, a bold reclaiming of our enslaved history. We were talking a little bit off mic. You also are directing the Revival of Aida. And I said, I want to lean into the Wiz because that's us. And you said, well, my Aida is us too. So because I saw Aida on Broadway, and Deborah Cox was in it on Broadway.
Yes.
She was amazing, but the man pissed me off because I'm like, he is not Egyptian or whatever. He was a white guy who kept growling, singing, and I was really mad. I was like, let Deborah Cox sing all of the roles. All right, tell me about your Aida.
So when I was asked to direct the Revival of Aida, I said, if we're going to do this, I want to tell it from a more historical perspective, because we're talking about two real places, Nubia and Egypt. And let's set the record straight that Egyptians and Nubians were indistinguishable. And so when you take the obvious color, because this is long before, the invasion of the Greeks and the Italians, and this is, this show takes place during the 25th dynasty. And so when you take colorism out of it, and you look at two people that are separated by culture and not by color, now you're telling, I think, a much more interesting story. Because they were different, but they overlapped in incredible ways. And both of these nations were genius. The Nubians were not subservient to the Egyptians. That is not the legacy of Nubia. Nubia, ran Egypt for many years. There were many Nubian pharaohs, and there were many women pharaohs. So we went through and we're telling, as my book is a bold reclaiming of our history, this Aida is also a bold reclaiming of our history.
Well, thank you, because I'm awakened finally, but I'm also, as many people, as we start to learn things, we get angry because we say to ourselves, why didn't we know this? Why didn't we know this? Why wasn't this taught in our schools? Why did I grow up with Cleopatra looking like Liz Taylor? Why have I never heard of Hatshepsut growing up? Why didn't I know about Queen Nzinga? And why didn't I know about the Nubians the way you're talking? Why didn't we know these things, Schele? And how did you find out?
I have to say, when I started doing the research, I was surprised. And I was saying all the same things that you're saying, all the same questions of, how didn't we know this? And I was like, oh, we didn't know this because we weren't telling our stories. When we get separated from our stories, we get separated from our history. We get robbed of our legacies. So it's time that we start telling our stories. And it's time that everyone around us demand authenticity in the stories we are telling. So that kind of demand is certainly, that reckoning is happening on Broadway. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to start using our platforms to say, if you're going to tell it right. These are our truths.
As I'm going through the book, Your Legacy, a bold reclaiming of our enslaved history, you say your story begins in Africa. Did you know Africans were the first people on the earth? Africa is a continent that is home to many countries and many thriving nations. For thousands of years, Africans cultivated their land and grew many kingdoms that were passed down from generation to generation. They dreamt of the day their land would be passed down to you. I was like, how did the mainstream publishers allow this in a book? How?
It's the truth. It's the truth. There's nothing in there to contradict. The thing I realized, I started this book because I wanted to talk to my children, my two girls, about their enslaved history. And actually, when I started the conversation, I wanted to talk to my girls about slavery because that's how it had been framed to me. And I couldn't figure out what age would be appropriate to have that conversation, because it is a painful conversation to have. And my girls were 7 and 8 years old. I kept thinking, well, maybe when they're 10, maybe. And I was like, well, if I wait too long, they're going to hear about it in school. And I don't want them to be traumatized the way that I was. So I started doing a little research to figure out how do I begin this story? How do I prepare them for what I know is to come in this story? And then the first 5 words to start the book, your story begins in Africa, kind of set the tone for the rest of the book. Because I realized I didn't want to tell a story about slavery. I didn't want to talk to them about slavery. I wanted to talk to them about their enslaved ancestors. And there is a real distinction between what happened to them and who they were. And so to start the story, it has to begin in the place of their homeland, where they thrived, where they were kings and queens, and where they were free, and they had families, and they loved and protected one another, where they spoke many, many languages, because it is indeed a continent of many, many cultures and countries and kingdoms. And then to connect the dots of when they were taken and brought to the Americas, that genius is what built this country. That genius is still everywhere. And because you and I and so many of us are sitting here, it is because our enslaved ancestors endured, thrived, their brilliance sustained them, their love, their ingenuity, their grace, and their dignity. We are the completion of their story. Their story lives on and deserves to be told with great pride.
I'm gonna do what Ayanna said. I'm gonna breathe through that. And I want to say thank you, Schele Williams, because I think we're under the mistaken, and I think it's a mistake that we live in a racist society. That's true. But part of the racism exists because we don't know who we are, and we allow it to. We allow it to. So the knowledge that those of us who are gaining it and seeking it are getting, it's our responsibility to do what you do, which is to write books about it and challenge Broadway to do better. But I think people are willing to do better. When we know better, we should do better, right? But
Yes.
we don't challenge the system that is teaching you, that traumatized you, traumatized me. That one chapter with those bodies stacked like sardines in the hold of a ship for 2 days. That's how I learned about slavery in a class full of white kids, that they were all looking at me, turning around and look at me in the back of the class. And I felt some ways about that. So you're making sure the next generation doesn't have that. And that's our responsibility.
I remember seeing, videos, movies, and seeing our ancestors speak in broken English, and I thought they were ignorant. It never dawned on me that they were fluent in other languages. It wasn't that they were uneducated. They were educated. They were prevented from having an education in English. It was an incomplete version of the story. The idea of seeing lashes on their backs, I thought it was because of something they did. I never attributed it to the cruelty that was put upon them. So when we start looking at the story from all sides, when we start filling in the facts that are missing, we realize that we all must remain extremely curious, and that the knowledge is out there and we have to keep seeking it. We can't just believe what we are told and have been told for years and years and years is the truth, because it can't be. Black excellence is everywhere. It's appropriated on a daily. So if we aren't great, then why is everybody taking our stuff? So we need to start recognizing in a big way our greatness and realize that it has been there since the very beginning of time.
The artwork, your legacy, a bold reclaiming of our enslaved history. The artwork, there's an image of a smiling Black woman with her head wrapped, looking down over the earth. I'm imagining that's Mother Earth. There are hands in the soil. There's a seed, a couple of seeds cracked open, roots in a tree. And it speaks to me. My soul smiled when I saw that picture. And as I'm going through all the images, I'm like, man, this was really thought about. The image of Africa with the people in the center of it. Talk about, how you selected the art and who you challenged or charged with making sure that our story was told in this way through pictures.
So the process for making a children's book was new to me because as a theater person, we collaborate on everything. We're in a room and we're talking about everything. But actually, when you do a children's book, the author and the illustrator never meet. And we don't talk during the process. So when I wrote the book, I sat down with the publishers and we looked at a lot of illustrators. And I fell in love with Tanya's work. One of the things that I knew for sure is that I wanted a Black woman and I wanted a mother to illustrate this book. Because if we were never going to have a conversation, I wanted to be sure that we spoke the same language. So when I saw Tanya's work, what I loved about it is it didn't look like it was work for children. Her work in all of her books and all of her art has great depth. She's a painter. All of these are paintings and they're layers upon layers upon layers upon layers. And that's what we are. We are layers upon layers. The more you look, the more you discover. So, I immediately knew when I saw her work that she was the illustrator. And I did a lot of praying that she would say yes. And what she's created, I believe is a true masterpiece. I mean, they could be murals everywhere. There's so many that I'm like, I want this to be a poster. I want this to,
oh my God.
Oh.
Jamboy. And I mean, listen, and her name is Tanya Engel. Yeah.
Yes, Tanya Angel.
Oh, Angel. Okay.
Angel, Tanya Angel.
Where is she from?
She lives in Houston, Texas.
Okay, Angel. I haven't seen that name, Engel. Of course, I would say it Engel because that's the way it looks phonetically, but Angel is even more, makes sense. Makes sense. So as a theater person, and we're talking, of course, with the great Schele Williams, how did you get a book deal? I know a little bit about books, just a little bit. And children's books, you got to right now be famous. Like that's kind of like, you got to be famous to get a children's book deal because it's a hard market to sell.
Yes.
So how were you able to navigate this?
So I was getting courted by CAA to come over, and I was at a lunch, and the agent said to me, "Is there anything else you've ever wanted to do?" And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I have this idea for a children's book." And he said, "Tell me all about it." And I told him about it. And what's pretty amazing, Karen, is I had actually told someone else about this book in the business. And they said to me, you should really just focus on directing. And I was like, okay. But I kept thinking, if I was struggling with this as a Black parent, and I'm talking with other people about how did you have this conversation? They're like, girl, I didn't have that conversation. I don't want to go, no one wanted to. It's not a conversation you think you want to have. It's a conversation you need to have. And so I was like, how do I turn this, you got to eat your vegetables, into a delicious dessert? How do I feel like there is a way to do this. So this is a story we want to tell our children. And so when I sat down with the CAA team a couple of weeks later, the book agent came in and she said, I heard all about your children's book idea. It's amazing. And if you write that book, if you write it and you give it to me in July, I will sell that book by September. Hand to God. You come here and don't you know, Karen, that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
That is exactly what happened. She said, we need this book. We need this book. And it just so happened that, I wrote the book, I got it to her on time. And that August, early September is when 1619 came out. And suddenly everybody was talking about, they were like, it was just on everybody's brain.
So wait, you did before 1619, before 1619 actually came out?
Yes, I had written the book.
You said beginning in Africa before 1619, your legacy presents an unprecedentedly accessible, empowering, and proud introduction to African-American history for children. You wrote that before there was a 1619 project.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think that was what kind of helped me sell the book is 1619 was on the brain and I was pitching the book to all of these publishers and they took the meeting. Nobody knew me. So they took the meeting, I think, because Nicole had written this beautiful tome that was in the Times and everyone was reading it. And they were like, a children's book about your enslaved history. We want to meet this Schele Williams, whoever she is, so that's really how it happened, because you're right. It is very difficult to break in when you don't have, a name
Yeah. Schele
or a
Williams.
history as a writer, or there's a history as a children's book writer already.
Well, this was supposed to happen.